have the symbol of the IMF. Let's move on. What I did here was I took 5 news articles about the Greek debt. 5 different articles. You've got one. I grabbed 4 others. I put them all into the website, and it comes up with the most frequent words. And the more frequently they're used, the larger the word. You can see debt. Greece, IMF. 3 biggest words, most important key terms. I like words like crisis. They're suffering an economic crisis. The measures that they have to put in place in order to get this money. Billions, questions around the market. What is the free market doing? All this is wrapped up in globalization, the movement of goods, capital, people across borders easily. Fancy. Europe is all in together, the world is together. This is why the world wants to help Greece. So there's a reason why we want to help states that struggle and why the IMF is created. The world has realised it's interconnected. That's what this was trying to get at. As always, your notes will come under these 4 categories. You've seen them before. Moving on. The 2 main names I want you to have, and you mentioned them yesterday in the list we did on the board. Global monetary cooperation. If you cooperate, you work together. And in this case, working together on issues of money, monetary. So it's not about isolating states. It's the reverse. It's about bringing states together. We don't want Greece to default. In the same way, we don't want Papua New Guinea to default. We don't want the Solomon Islands to default. We prop up states in our region because it's in our interest. So the IMF helps foster global monetary cooperation and securing financial stability. So financial stability means you can keep making repayments over time. How does it do this? It has certain things that it does. This is the doing, lending. The biggest thing is lending money. It provides loans to countries that have trouble making repayments. So states are interesting in that they don't get all their money at once. And they certainly don't get it at the start of the year. Most companies and most individuals pay tax at the end of the financial year. But during that year, the government has to keep paying for stuff. It has to pay for roads, for teachers, for hospitals, everything. So it often borrows money temporarily. At the start of the year, it'll borrow money from the IMF. And then once it collects all the tax from companies, it'll then pay the IMF off at the end of the year. So in the short term, the IMF does the lending. It also does surveillance, so it monitors different members, monitors their policies. So it's constantly collecting all this information from all of the different states about what they're doing in terms of their money. Because these guys want financial stability. And they want to start to identify trends that might lead to financial instability. Their job is not happening. Thirdly, assistance. Mainly low middle-income countries. They help states who are struggling. Not all states are run by competent people. Not all states have really qualified, experienced international economists. Some of them are run by dictators who take over who don't have a clue about money. Some of them have really popular movie stars who get elected president and then have to run an economy of hundreds of billions. Ronald Reagan was a US president who was a movie star. Argentina had a movie star president. I think Thailand. It's common. I'd say it's ongoing for just about everyone to some degree, but for the poorer states, low-income states, it'd be continuous long-term. Yeah. So these are the things that it actually does. And of course, if you've got a question about describe the role of the IMF, you might just talk about lending and then use the example of lending money. And you can elaborate on that example. So you really only need to know one of these. That would be enough. You can talk about more than one, that's fine. In a roles question, you could talk about lending. No, that's why we're only doing one example per global actor. We don't need to know more than that. It's power. As you guys said yesterday, it has cash. It distributes over 100 billion in loans. That's a lot of cash available to it to distribute to states. That gives it economic power. And in the situation we've just looked at, the Greece one, it has power to distribute loans to Greece. So it's in the optimum position in that relationship between Greece and the IMF. Loans are connected to conditions. The IMF will decide under what circumstances it will lend you money. Now, you have some power as well. You can decide not to borrow the money. But the IMF will set the conditions. And so they should. It's their money. Lastly, this one's a little bit technical. But power isn't evenly distributed within the IMF. It's not one state, one vote. You get as many votes as money that you give to the IMF. The IMF gets money from states, from wealthy states. Mostly America. So America gives the US contributes 17% of the IMF's right. I'm now. I'm going to check that. But essentially, the US has the veto. The US has to agree with any loan because it provides by far the most money to the IMF. I'll check those two stats. Yeah, no, I think I've put them in a confusing way. I want to check them. The stat will eventually read something like 80% of the IMF votes have to be in favour of a loan, and the US contributes 81%. Therefore, they have to be on side. Something like that. So power is unevenly distributed, just like with lots of our global actors, like the Security Council. So in this case, power is unevenly distributed because of the quota system. Yeah, I've got to check that. I think it's... Yeah, don't those figures. No, I want to double check. But it's the US one that then is unclear. Oh no, this is right. Sorry, 85% of votes have to vote no. The US says no to a loan, and every other country around says yes. Most of this deal was 83. Does that make sense? Well, 100 minus 17. Yeah. So the US gets 17 votes. It says it doesn't want to give one vote. Every other state most that you have to get at least 85% of donors willing to do the loan. If the US said no, yes. Board. They've got a veto in this body. All right, influence. Two parts like always. One, they are effective. They're effective at distributing loans to developing countries who need short-term cash to make repayments. And they're influential in the way that they can influence a state's internal financial policies, just like you saw with that article. they've had a significant influence over what Greece does. Economic sovereignty has gone out the window in Greece. Greeks aren't rioting for no reason. They're pretty upset. So, yes, they're very influential. However, as always, we want to talk about the limitations. The states decide to stop lending money to the IMF will have nothing to lend out to states that need it. But as with every one of our IGGs, states, if you don't want a loan, you don't have to get a loan. You might pursue cash from other sources. That's what's been in the 80s and 90s, the IMF was incredibly influential. Really, really powerful. It basically controlled a whole bunch of countries, big countries like Argentina. And what happened after the Asian crisis, lots of middle countries like Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, they never wanted to be under the control of the IMF. So they started to build up these big reserves of cash. And they started to pull together and develop these pools of cash that states would share. So if any one of them really struggled, they could draw on that pool of cash. So middle countries make sure that they never really have to borrow large sums. They let themselves come under the control of the IMF. And we now find that it's the wealthy states in Europe, or the formerly wealthy states like Greece, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Ireland, who are the ones going to the IMF. So its influence is waning. It's deteriorating. It's not as significant as it was in the 80s and 90s. Some cartoons. This is the idea that the IMF is grinding the world away. This one has the IMF and the EU trying to carry the Greek economy, keep it up in the air, but of course everyone is being weighed down by debt. So both the IMF and the EU weighed down by the debt that is tied to the Greek economy. This one tries to capture some of the negative sentiment towards the IMF. And it is widespread. The protests you get. We had huge ones here in, I want to say about 2004, because they held one of the World Economic Forums in Melbourne. And people tore the city down. They were massive protests. Hundreds of people were arrested. Really, really big. I'll see if I can find some footage. But people went on a rampage, just broke everything. And the city was like a riot zone. In fact, the riot police were out. So what people are protesting against is the idea that these institutions will control us. Instead of our government will make decisions and we elect our government, it's a protest against these institutions, against big business. You've got your case study, that's fine.